This is how I would rise, from the silence of routine into the roar of power. Not the kind of power you inherit or stumble upon, but the kind forged through self-mastery, strategy, and audacity. Machiavelli once wrote that fortune is a woman, and to command her, you must treat her boldly. He wasn't speaking of chance, he was revealing a law. That fortune yields to those who act with ruthless certainty. I didn't learn this from books. I learned it through scars, because I too once lived the obedient life, performing at my desk, collecting a salary, swallowing resentment like medicine. I played by the rules, waited for permission, for approval, for a turn that never came. Until one day I stopped waiting. I realized fortune isn't a favor to earn, it's a force to seize. That was the day my real life began. If I could speak to that former version of myself, tucked behind a glowing screen, proud of stability but empty of purpose, I wouldn't tell him to quit. I'd tell him to rewire, because the first battlefield isn't out there, it's in your head. Every empire begins with a conquest of the mind. A man's wealth is the mirror of his discipline, the reflection of his chosen craft. Machiavelli said every prince must possess virtue, the will to shape uncertainty instead of serving it. Today, that virtue means leverage, the Machiavellian edge. Not just talent, but discipline weaponized. So I treated my life like a strategist. I opened the modern Florence, Google, and searched the domains where power is bred. Entrepreneurs, investors, creators, engineers of systems and wealth. I didn't scroll, I dissected. I scored each path by curiosity and capability. Where those two overlapped, I knew I'd find my entry point. Law felt too rigid. Engineering too slow. Climbing a corporate ladder? That was servitude disguised as success. What drew me was entrepreneurship. Not for glamour, but for sovereignty. Because power isn't found in comfort. It's taken in control. Like a prince reclaiming a fallen castle, I wasn't escaping risk. I was chasing authority. But then came the next law of ascension, isolation. You cannot build a fortress surrounded by jesters. The people around you shape your future long before you realize it. When I declared I would build something of my own, I expected applause. Instead, I met laughter, silence, doubt. Not because they hated me, but because my ambition threatened their comfort. I spoke of systems, models, and plans, and they changed the topic back to gossip. Back to television. Back to numbness. That's when I understood. My evolution made me a foreigner among them. It wasn't personal. It was natural selection. Biology punishes stagnation and rewards adaptation. So I withdrew. The silence that followed was heavy but sacred. Exile always precedes elevation. Napoleon was exiled before he became emperor. Machiavelli, stripped of his position, wrote The Prince in his banishment. Isolation isn't punishment, it's a rite of passage. The weak call it loneliness. The strong call it preparation, because your energy is finite. Every conversation, every distraction, every drop of attention is fuel or waste. So I sealed my fortress, closed the gates, guarded my mind like treasure. I didn't lose friends, I shed noise. And in that void, I filled my world with intelligence, philosophy, and war strategy. When the noise died, my voice returned. I stopped thinking like an employee and began moving like a ruler. But even a ruler must learn. Isolation without mentorship is exile without direction. So I sought teachers, not influencers, architects, men who had already conquered their realms. Power doesn't pass by luck. It passes by imitation. So I replaced noise with patterns. I studied the psychology of titans. I didn't want to worship greatness. I wanted to reverse engineer it. Bezos on time, Buffett on patience, Musk on audacity. These weren't mere businessmen. They were modern princes, sovereign in their domains. Machiavelli said, "The wise man does at once what the fool does at last." These men embodied it. They moved with speed and clarity while others hesitated. That's when I learned the next law. Time is not free. It's your sovereign asset. Machiavelli warned that idleness is decay. In our world, mornings are not for recovery. Nights are not for escape. They are for conquest. Most people burn hours numbing themselves. I burned mine forging myself. Podcasts in the car, audiobooks in the gym, notes at red lights. Every minute was either sharpening my blade or letting it rust. But knowledge without aim is vanity. Learning alone changes nothing. You must declare your conquest. The prince does not rule by vague ambition. He rules toward a defined territory. So I chose mine: business, media, the empire of influence. I mapped the terrain, studied leverage, dissected the compounding effect of effort. Because in this world, authority is the new currency, and authority is earned through precision. But theory alone cannot baptize a man into power. There comes a moment when you must enter the arena. From digital to physical, from thought to blood. In Florence, Machiavelli's princes traded influence in courts and salons. Today it's masterminds, conferences, boardrooms. These are the new palaces, and the entry fee is never free. It costs money, yes, but more than that, it costs nerve. I learned that the weak see debt as a chain. The strong wield it as a sword. The masses call investment risk. Princes call it necessity. Machiavelli warned that revolution, whether in the state or the soul, is the most dangerous and uncertain act, yet the only one that births a new order. The question isn't, can you afford to act? It's, can you afford not to? I still remember the threshold. An online course, $4,000, a marketing blueprint. I barely had a fraction of it. Every instinct screamed, wait, but I understood. Waiting is the cousin of decay. So I paid, not for the course, but for the future version of myself who would survive it. That act changed everything. Because now I had to win. There was no backup plan, no safety net. I'd converted comfort into fire. That's why fortune favors the bold, because boldness leaves no room for retreat. Musk sold his possessions to fund Tesla. The Medici borrowed beyond reason to rule Florence. Alexander burned his ships so his men had no choice but victory. These weren't gambles. They were declarations of intent. When you remove the escape route, the only direction left is forward. That is how debt becomes power. The weak borrow to escape pressure. The strong borrow to create it. And that pressure is the crucible of dominance. That is why I tell anyone serious about ascent, get uncomfortable. Pay to enter the rooms that scare you. Not because they guarantee success, but because they demand transformation. Every time I entered one, trembling and anonymous, I left sharper, hungrier. I began to understand how empires are built, not through noise but through presence. The powerful rarely shout. They observe. They command with stillness. They influence through silence. I studied them, their posture, their eyes, their restraint. Who speaks with gravity? Who listens with precision? Who alters the room without lifting their voice? Power doesn't beg to be noticed. It demands attention through certainty. Machiavelli said a prince should study the actions of great men. That includes the ruthless parts, the gestures, the silences, the placement of every word and glance. So I turned networking into reconnaissance. Before every gathering, I planned like a general. Who would be there? What did they build? What did they need? I didn't arrive to meet everyone. I arrived to identify the few who could shift my orbit. Because this isn't friendship, it's selection. Every alliance is measured. Every smile is a move. The weak resent this truth. The wise weaponize it. You are not there to be liked. You are there to be remembered. But recognition alone is not enough. One weapon separates the peasant from the prince: persuasion. Machiavelli called it the sharper sword, because no empire was ever built without belief. The richest men alive aren't just innovators. They are persuaders. Bezos sold a future before it existed. Jobs sold identity before he sold devices. Even Machiavelli himself, disgraced and exiled, sold the prince as a manual to the very rulers who condemned him. Persuasion redeemed him. It's not manipulation, it's architecture. The architecture of belief. I remember when this truth pierced me. I had work ethic. I had intellect. But I was invisible, because effort without persuasion is motion without momentum. So I devoted myself to mastering the psychology of influence, to see not what people say, but what they seek. Because selling is not convincing, it's revealing. Seeing the pain behind the eyes and offering the bridge across it. Machiavelli called it understanding human nature. And once you understand that, you cease to chase power and begin to command it. Love or fear, those are the levers. The entire architecture of influence rests on them. The first sale a man must make is always to himself. Because if you do not believe in your own worth, no one else will. The voice betrays the truth. The uncommitted tone wavers. The convinced one cuts. When I learned that, everything changed. My posture, my silence, my energy. I didn't need to shout anymore. I spoke with gravity. People began to listen, not because I was loud, but because I was certain. And certainty, in a world starving for direction, is power. But belief alone is not enough. Faith without structure dissolves into fantasy. So I learned to refine it with measurement. Because wealth is not mystical, it is mathematical. Power obeys calculation, not hope. Machiavelli wrote that fortune governs half our actions, but the other half is ours. That half is precision, metrics, targets, clarity. You cannot command what you do not count. So I converted ambition into arithmetic. $1 million became 2,040 a day. That was the battlefield. From there I mapped backwards, the campaigns, the offers, the conversions. No more guessing, no more luck, only tracking. The fog lifted. Purpose emerged. Every number became a soldier, every result, intelligence. Consistency turned from burden to weapon. But even the disciplined faced storms, rejection, exhaustion, ridicule. Every time I hit resistance, Machiavelli's warning echoed. There is nothing more perilous or uncertain than introducing a new order. The world punishes those who attempt transformation. Comfort defends itself violently. And in those moments, I realized it wasn't skill or time I lacked. It was hunger. Ruthless, unending hunger. The kind that burns pride into fuel. I stopped looking at my bank account as numbers and began seeing it as distance, the space between who I was and who I must become. That pressure forged me. The weak call it anxiety. The strong call it ignition. Every morning became ritual. I stared at the gap between my vision and my reality. That tension kept me alive, because comfort is the drug that kills ambition silently. The moment you stop feeling discomfort, you start decaying. Hunger kept me dangerous. It reminded me that I was still becoming, that I was still in the game. And wealth, I learned, is not a number, it's a mirror. It reflects how much control you've taken over yourself. You cannot command a kingdom if you cannot command your emotions. The men who ascend, who rise from nothing to sovereignty, don't wait for permission. They take it. They don't ask fortune to smile, they strike her. Because Machiavelli's virtue was never about morality, it was about will. The ability to bend chaos into order. Fortune will test you, he said, but she ultimately yields to the audacious. That became my worldview. Life is not a sequence of events. It's a war for control. A chessboard of leverage. Every day I ask myself, am I the ruler today or the ruled? That question rewired me. It changed how I spoke, planned, invested. It made hesitation feel like treason. And from that state, success became inevitable. Not because it was easy, but because retreat was no longer possible. Once you've built yourself from fire and necessity, you can rebuild from anything. You become the architect. You stop seeing obstacles and start seeing patterns, systems, opportunities. You realize the powerful were never lucky. They were engineers of leverage. They learned to design inevitability. That's the essence of dominion. Not wealth alone, but the ability to shape outcomes. To move without permission. To enter any room and alter its gravity. That's when I understood the final law of ascension. To stand among the powerful is not enough. You must become one of them. Machiavelli said a ruler's intelligence can be measured by the quality of his allies. Today, that means your circle, your influence, your ability to make others move. Not through force, but through vision. The richest men alive are not merely inventors. They are persuaders. They move nations with sentences. They sell not products, but philosophies. Bezos sold inevitability. Jobs sold identity. Musk sells destiny. Every empire begins as an idea spoken with conviction and absorbed by the hungry. Every fortune begins as a conversation that became a contract. When I learned this, I stopped being humble about my ambition. I stopped mistaking arrogance for confidence. Arrogance is empty noise. Certainty is silent authority. When you speak from that place, people don't just hear you, they align with you. Persuasion isn't about words. It's the transfer of belief. And belief, once transferred, becomes infrastructure. It builds invisible cities in the minds of others. But persuasion without targets is chaos. So I became surgical. Machiavelli would say a prince must know his domain with precision. In modern terms, metrics. You cannot scale what you do not measure. I began treating goals like geometry. I broke down income into operations, campaigns into ratios, dreams into equations. The illusion of luck vanished. Success became math. Every setback became data. Every pivot an optimization. Clarity replaced confusion, and confidence followed clarity. Because when you measure progress, you witness proof, and proof breeds momentum, and momentum, once awakened, is unstoppable. Still, even armed with clarity, the war continues. Resistance is inevitable. Machiavelli warned that the most dangerous act is to build a new order because the old one will always resist. The systems you once served will fight your escape. The friends you outgrow will question your silence. The world will ask you to soften, to slow down, to be realistic. And that's where most men fall, not from failure, but fatigue. They forget the hunger that began their journey. They let comfort whisper them back to mediocrity. They win small and call it enough. They sleep in palaces they haven't even built. That's why I remind myself daily, I am not yet who I'm meant to be. When I review my numbers, I don't feel pride. I feel distance. That gap keeps me sharp. It humbles me, warns me, fuels me. It's proof the mission continues. Machiavelli called it necessita, the pressure that compels greatness. Comfort lulls. Hunger awakens. Praise sedates. Pressure sharpens. When I win, hunger asks, what's next? That's how evolution sustains itself. The summit is never the end. It's the beginning of a steeper climb. The higher you rise, the more clarity you need, because now others will follow your fire. Influence once gained must be wielded with intention. Every word becomes structure. Every product becomes legacy. Every action becomes instruction. This is the final transformation, from seeker of power to distributor of it. But distribution without control is charity. And Machiavelli warned, give only what strengthens your position. The ruler ensures his people always need him. In our age, that means building something irreplaceable, a vision, a service, a community, a machine of value that the world cannot function without. That is how you ensure relevance, permanence, dominion. That is why I no longer chase attention. I build necessity. Because when what you create becomes essential, the world reorganizes itself around you. The gatekeepers open the doors. The skeptics rewrite their doubts. The silence turns into applause. But by then, you won't crave it. Because once you have built inner sovereignty, applause is irrelevant. You sell not for validation, but for velocity. You invest not for luxury, but for leverage. You risk not for thrill, but for transformation. You wake not for survival, but for legacy. That is how you command the game. Not by asking, by earning. Not by waiting, by acting. Not by obeying, by becoming undeniable. And if you've listened this far, it means something in you is already shifting. Because the truth has a vibration. It calls only to those who are ready to rule. Understand this. Wealth is not random. Power is not inherited. Influence is not gifted. All of it is taken, precisely, patiently, relentlessly. The real war isn't against the world, it's against yourself. Against fear, against hesitation, against the temptation to stop before the conquest is complete. You were not born to blend in. You were born to bend reality, to master your craft, to craft your empire, to rule your domain, not because anyone crowned you, but because you crowned yourself. That is the rebirth of the mind, the reforging of the will. The moment you stop chasing permission and start executing as if fortune were already yours. And when that happens, when you strike her with purpose and precision, fortune doesn't smile. She kneels, not out of favor but out of recognition, because she knows she has met her master. So if this voice has reached you, don't let it fade into motivation. Let it become movement. Pick the skill, pick the room, pick the number, then strike, without apology. Without hesitation, without mercy, because your kingdom waits, and only the bold will rise to claim it.